We are live. Awesome. Well, welcome everyone back to the ProbsCast. Back and better. Absolutely. Today I got Greg Swaim with us. Greg, say what's up.
Well, I'm just having a great time talking to you, my friend.
How long you been in radio, man?
Since 1988, part time and then full time somewhere in the mid 90s since then, and giving it all up finally as I realized, what the way to go is podcasting. I don't have any bosses telling me what I can and cannot say. I don't have to mind my P's and Q's. And the beauty of it is, and you probably know this, your sponsors, you sell a sponsorship for $500, you get $500 instead of $100. How about
Yeah.
that? So I'll definitely go that way, and I can make my own hours. It's beautiful, man. Technology is just a wonderful thing. I'm really envious of your generation because had I been in college during this time, I would have definitely be doing what you're doing. And people always like young kids or their parents would go, how does Junior get into this, or how do I get into this? Like, man, if I'm you, I start a podcast. Tell mom and dad for your birthday you want this equipment. Man, I've got about $2,000 worth of equipment sitting here for our new show, which is starting next month. I haven't even set it up yet, so I may need your help.
Yeah, that's definitely for sure. It is nice. You're talking about like the sponsorships and everything like that. If anyone's listening that likes to sponsor a podcast, I'm a sellout. I'll totally take your money. I'll do whatever you want. But
Absolutely.
it is kind of cool. Like we were talking earlier about how I can bring like video and I can bring like better audio and things like that just because I'm out of college and I was broke before. So like now I got like a 9 to 5 and like living a boring life and all that. And I just felt like it was just kind of time to get back into the podcasting and everything like that. But I agree. Anyone who's our age should definitely have a podcast.
Well, that's another thing. We're starting here at what, 718 or so. We talked about 7, and we've been talking ever since and getting everything set up. And I know you're using some new software, which I'll be using too. So I'll be asking you for advice. But it's so much fun. You get to talk about what you want to talk about. You set the times you want to talk about. If there's something breaking, it used to drive me nuts, man. I would like something would break like at 11 o'clock at night, and I don't have my show till 11 o'clock the next day. And by the time I get there, everybody's scooping me. Well, with Twitter and
Yeah.
with able to go on a podcast now immediately, nobody scoops me if I get it first. So,
Yeah, I know, and I've noticed that. So when I'm from Fort Worth, Texas, right? And
uh-huh.
when I decided to go to Oklahoma State, I was really really big on social media before. And like I redid everything. I deleted all my accounts, and I wanted to go and follow like the best Oklahoma State accounts. That way, I was always up to date, and I've always seen your name like everywhere in regards to.
Either good or bad, it's all good.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right, and it's never annoying when you're on Twitter, and I think that people kind of lose track of that because they feel like they're being annoying if they post too much. But I feel like you're posting all the time. You follow a lot of people, and you're one of the
Yeah.
first big people for me to get like a follower from. And I was like, dude, awesome. You're still killing it.
Well, I've been doing it a long time, and it's a lot of fun. And unlike some of the my counterparts who have been on YouTube a long time with a podcast, I don't think they get like I'll look at them and they're have 6 or 7 thousand followers, which isn't terrible, but you got to really get your Twitter account and your Facebook and your Instagram and all that stuff going to let people know that you're going to be on at this time.
Yeah.
And once the show's over and you record it, put it out there. I didn't see anything on your Twitter page really to, talking about this one, but I know, you'll put something out there. And if you will, go ahead and hook me up with it, I'll put it out get a lot more viewers, which is good because the more viewers you get, it's easier to sell sponsorships, right?
No, you're 100% right, and it was kind of funny because like when I first really started like getting big on social media while at Oklahoma State, I was running the Barstool account and everything like that. Well, whenever I left Barstool, it kind of turned into my own thing, and like you were saying, like I find it more comfortable personally. And then I started running like Willie's social media, I started doing ads and Coney Island social media, and like they all kind of like I interlooped them really well. in the sense that like, if I post something on Coney, I could go not necessarily respond because I didn't like talking to myself. I felt like a loser. But I would go and like repost it and things like that. And I think that, with my generation and everything like that we know, you'd almost be an idiot to not, take advantage of these social media perks yeah, you might not be a millionaire, but there's certain perks that come from OK State Pros where I haven't done a podcast in over a year, but like people still send me merchandise and things like that. And I love it. I feel more engulfed in the community, if that makes sense.
I love your backdrop, by the way. I want you to, I know you got a TCU helmet up there. I'm trying to see what else you got.
Yeah,
so from Fort Worth, you got a lot of TCU love. I get that. And hey, they just had a great season in football, basketball, and baseball. Yeah. So you got to give it up to them. But obviously we love the Cowboys more because we both went to school there. So it's all good.
Well, so my stepdad is in the Hall of Fame for TCU football.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah, and I'm currently in his office. And I actually threw the basketball in there because I was like, dude, I got to put some sort of orange. And don't get me wrong, like I have a soft spot for TCU. I grew up going to games. My stepdad would bring me around Gary Patterson and the team. And, I loved it. I did, but like, it's no question for me whenever Oklahoma State ever plays against TCU because Oklahoma State's, that was God's path for me, and I'll never go against it, if that makes sense.
My dad got his bachelor's and master's at Purdue in engineering back in the 50s, and then got his PhD early 60s at Ohio State, and I hate Ohio State, but I love Purdue. I think I'm one of those guys that just likes the underdog. Which, and you don't remember this, but, gosh, when I was in school, they were pretty good. We had good defense with Leslie O'Neal and Big John and Mark Cutts and some of those. And we were not great in offense, but it changed in the 90s and into the 2000s and all that. And but, Oklahoma State wasn't great for most of my for most of the 80s and 90s. Most of it, they weren't very good. 10-1 season when I got my master's and moved to Enid, met my wife, got married, had a baby, moved back in late 91, and going through that 10-1 season was as bad as it could possibly get. And, it's gotten a lot better. It's why I feel about him. I know after last year, some people are hard on Mike Gundy. People my age, for the most part, we've seen some really, really bad ball, right? Yeah. So it was Rust-Oleum Stadium. I don't know if you remember how it was before Boone Pickens Stadium when it was Lewis Field. But when you have that perspective of how bad it was and how hard it was to recruit to Oklahoma State, and now you got some of the toys and the bells and whistles, and hopefully, through you guys, I'm not really involved with NIL because, I do more regional and national stuff, but that's why I love coming on a show like yours because I can let down my fake face when I do nationals and pretend like I'm neutral. I don't really ever pretend like I'm neutral. I'm one of those guys that I'll admit to you, man, I want Oklahoma State to win in every sport by 100-0. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But there's also, your media hat that you have to wear sometimes. You're not allowed to, as you're not allowed to root the press box, Yeah. And I actually got kicked. When I was your age, I got kicked out of the press box one time. Cowboys and Texas Tech in one of those 55-50 shootouts. And here comes Texas Tech, and they've got another NFL quarterback, and he's getting together. All of a sudden, we intercepted with 20 seconds to go, and I couldn't help myself. I actually escorted myself out before I was asked to leave. So I learned my lesson. You don't share the press box, but I'm always going to be a Cowboy fan. I mean, I got both my bachelor's and master's here. Might even get my PhD one day as I'm working on a book right now if I can join those two things. And just having the time of my life, man. I'm kind of retired except for this podcast stuff. My sons are taking over a lot of the business, and I'll probably hire somebody else here later on to do some of that. But, man, I'm just having the time of my life. I wish they would have had this stuff back in the 80s. I'd have gone nuts.
No, that makes a lot of – you said your father was at Ohio State when?
He was at Ohio State, got his PhD in 66, in
Okay.
aeronautical engineering.
Okay, my grandfather went to Ohio State he was on baseball, and then he pitched for the Pittsburgh Pirates, struck out Jackie Robinson, right?
Nice.
Great athlete. And then when that didn't work out, he actually went back to Ohio State again. This is like late 50s, early 60s.
Is
And
he
played
from Ohio? Was he
is my
from?
family from Ohio? No.
Yeah. Okay.
I actually have been doing like a family tree deal, and I was so convinced that my uncle went to West Virginia because he's always worn West Virginia gear. Little did I know that my family, majority of them, were all born in West Virginia. I found this out like 2 nights ago. But
Okay.
then they moved to Indiana, so I thought my mother was from Indiana. Then my father's from East Texas, so they migrated down here, obviously. But yeah, I was joking with I was joking around. I was like, damn, no wonder I loved Morgantown so much whenever I went there.
Oh, it's a great place. I was actually born in Cincinnati, lived my first 5 years in Dayton, Ohio, but from age 5 to 16, before I moved to Oklahoma, we were at Purdue, where my dad got both his bachelor's and master's, and originally from a little town about 45 miles there. We moved down to Oklahoma State in the summer of '78, so that's 45 years now. I was 16. And we moved here, and Dad was the associate dean of the Engineering, Architecture, and Technology College. So if you have any old engineers watching that went to school in the '80s, they may know him.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely possible. Yeah, no, for sure. And you know, you talked about getting kicked out of the press conference. I was very close to TCU. Obviously, we kind of harped on that. But in 2014, when TCU beat Baylor at home, it was the last game of the year. It was raining, freezing cold. I knew the TCU stadium pretty well because I've been there so many times. And so we rushed the field. Well, I was trying to get off, but then I kind of realized that no one was stopping me from going into the media room. And I must have been like 17. This is the moment I fell in love with sports, because I sat down where they were going to interview Gary Patterson. So I sat down, and there were all the guys, you know, the beat writers in there, and they had their laptops. And I kind of started asking them, without trying to reveal that I wasn't even a student at the time, and just be like, hey, how did you get into this? Well, then Gary Patterson came up, and he was going down the line for questions. I was like, shit, I'll ask him a question. And he got to me, and I had met him before, but I just asked him why he didn't shake Art Brau's hand after the game. And it was a great question. But afterwards, he got done, and he asked me, or the security came up to me, and they said, you know, you got to go. And they started, and I knew Gary Patterson, so he came over and was like, that was hysterical, Keaton. He goes, now get the hell out of here. And so I left, but I was like, that was the moment that I really did fall in love with sports and everything like that. But regardless, it's grown so much. And then I've watched you grow from the moment back in 2018 when I started really paying attention to your account. And what I really liked is I feel like there's a very diverse way you can do Twitter. Like I've done the Barstool, my personal Twitter. I reported some stuff. I do the NIL Post of the Purpose. I run all their social media. And with you, I feel like you've got like some sort of like a beat writer aspect to you, in the sense that like you have like certain stories that, I mean, you've been in the industry long enough, you know when stuff's about to break, and you can kind of hint and tell people like that. But like, how did you really like necessarily find yourself in a role like that? And I know you're halfway retired, and you said that, but like, how did you find yourself in like this halfway like beat writer role?
Well, I started out as a basketball scout. When I got I moved to Dallas in '85 after I got my bachelor's in economics. Went down to Dallas, worked in the oil and banking industry, which explains why after about 3 years I came back. Basically, the company I was with was going out of business, and they gave me 6 months severance. Best thing that ever happened. Because we both and got our master's degrees. I got mine in sports geography. My degree says Master's of Science in Geography, but it's really sports geography with Dr. Rooney. John Rooney is absolutely the father of sports geography. And what sports geography is in a nutshell, because nobody knows what that is, right? Yeah. Okay, it's like, okay, if I was to ask you if every place in the world turns out the exact same number of athletes per capita, right? That could play any sport. What sport would you be more likely to grow up to play in Indiana? If I asked you, what would you say?
In Indiana, basketball.
Yeah, there you go. What state, if you were in Texas, most likely?
Football.
There you go. What state in, not a state, but Canada, what sport are you going to play?
I mean, what are Canadians play? Hockey.
There you go. See, you're 3 for 3. You need to get your master's in sports geography. Dr. Rooney's retired now, but his son, ironically, you ever heard of Folds of Honor?
No.
Okay, it's basically they take care of kids whose parents have died while in service of our country and one of the armed services. And what Dan Rooney, matter of fact, I don't know if he's still the same rank. What they in Forrest Gump? What they Lieutenant Dan?
Yeah,
they used to call Lieutenant Dan. Yeah. So anyway, Dan Rooney, he was younger than me growing up. Well, I used to catch the bus with his sister before I started driving, right? Mm-hmm. So, but anyway, Dr. Rooney is the man. I mean, if you want a guy to come on, because I'm going to get him on my show when we start up in August, but you want to get him on, I mean, he is fascinating. And if you like golf and you like skiing, the Golf Digest and Ski Country magazine, back when I was in school, they hired him to do these studies in economic geography where he knew where to put the houses on a ski slope, or the not necessarily houses, but places to stay to maximize their dollar and things like that. And so he really helped me get involved in this. When I came back, got my master's, I did my master's thesis on where basketball players came from in the 50s as opposed to the late 80s, right? And how it changed. And it became, instead of a regional game, more of a national game. So he really helped me in that. And through that, got a internship, a paid internship, writing for Hoop Scoop magazine. And from there on, after a couple of years, I started my own service because I knew all the college coaches, and they said, "Hey, we'll take your service." And it was called Oklahoma Hoops, then later Midwest Basketball, and then later Greg Swaim Basketball and Sports. So we do the whole country. Now we're even doing international. And I've got 40 plus scouts around the country, and then a few overseas as well. So
that's awesome. Okay, so what you seem to like break a lot of. We talked a lot about ourselves, so yeah, people are still listening. What's it called? So you talked a lot about like conference realignment and everything like that, and I like kind of being on the side I'm on, where like I'm in between, like knowing information through Post and Purpose. Getting information because of the people that follow, like all my great followers. But like when it comes to conference realignment and everything like that, it's looking like, in my opinion, it's moving to more of a national brand than it is like a regional, which is what most people are used to. But is this Colorado deal ever going to happen?
This got to be the most frustrating thing ever. I don't know. Sometimes I shouldn't tweet as late at night as I do. Yeah. But I did last night. I started thinking, this is just like, did it drive you crazy in maybe high school or maybe even college? You want to date a girl, she's nice and everything. She's not like, but she's pretty nice. But she's got like, maybe it's an old boy or something, and he's just like, maybe he's been in jail a couple times, doesn't have a job, mooches off of her. But why do good girls like bad boys? Why does Colorado want to stay in a bad conference? Did that pay squat? I really can't understand why this hadn't happened. Now, I get the academic thing. They're a bunch of snobs. Utah, perfect example. You've been on here long enough to know Utah fans and I have a very adversarial relationship because I'm just pointing out, dude, you're 105th out of what, 190? You're not special. You're not even in the top half. So why are you making fun of, by the way, there's 4 schools in the Big 12 that all rank higher than you. So you're not special. Yeah, I get it. You're in the same conference with Stanford. That would be like if I was standing next to Brooklyn Decker, if you know who that is, and that makes me handsome. No, it doesn't work that way. Sorry.
I completely agree. And I haven't really met many good Utah fans, to be honest. And I'm a pretty fair person, right? And the ones that I interacted with, one of the funniest ones, their name on Twitter, like that they had showing, was like back-to-back Rose Bowls. And I was like, how do you
Back to
even
back losses.
yeah, like that's the first thing they want people to read when they click on their
Right.
account. I'm like, what are we doing here?
And I'll be honest with you, I've met some really nice Utah fans, and I'm actually working with one in our new network right now, and the new podcast. It's very interesting though, because there's some really good Utah fans. I think that maybe it's probably like Oklahoma State fans like me.
Yeah,
We think we're a little bit better than maybe the rest of the world thinks we are.
yeah,
Utah fans are on acid doing that. I mean,
yeah,
like
yeah,
I posted about a month ago, and it got retweeted more than anything I've ever posted. Got retweeted. It said they think they're Ohio State in football, and they think they're Harvard in academics, and
yeah.
they are not close to either.
No, they're not. They're not. I as like and I could go a million ways of saying conference realignment, but I do think that it would be more. I can see the pros and cons, but I think that it'd be more beneficial having Utah in the Big 12 personally, just because we have BYU now, and it creates like the holy war, and like one of the and I'm going to compare it to the SEC, but like the SEC, for example, like my younger brothers go to Arkansas. I got two younger brothers who go to Arkansas. Another one lives in Fayetteville.
I'm sorry, everybody's got their family problems.
Dude, I blew my mind. I was like, man, you don't even choose Oklahoma State. You'll choose somewhere fun. Like, I guess Fayetteville's kind of fun, but
I've heard Arkansas is pretty fun.
Yeah,
Hey,
no,
Springfield, the Fayetteville Springfield area is so hilly. It's a lot of fun to drive through.
the first thing I did was take a photo where Baker Mayfield got arrested.
There you go.
But regardless, like my younger brother, shout out to him. He wanted to follow my footsteps, so his account's called the Hogs Probs.
Okay.
Yeah, hysterical. It kind of rhymes, but he was talking to me about how like the SEC like made this rivalry up between like Mizzou and Arkansas, and they call it like the border war or something like that. And I think the SEC does a really great job of incorporating, regardless of how deep the rivalry goes or not. They always put a name on it, and they give someone a trophy. And people like, they look. It's not just Arkansas playing Mizzou. It's the border war, and like they hate and they border each other, and they got a trophy at the end, and all that jazz. And who really cares about watching Arkansas versus Mizzou compared to any other game? Not saying that it's not a great game, but like it's just another college football game to me personally. And like I think that adding something like that, where it'd be the Holy War, or hell, even, and this is the dream of mine, but to get FSU in Miami, then you have 3 schools in Florida, and that's just a nonstop, battle within itself. And I don't know, it's all theoretical.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I got asked the other day on another show was, okay, if the SEC is so great, and let's be honest, in football they are, baseball too, apparently, but in football they've kind of dominated. We know that. I mean, if we take our Big 12 glasses off here, we know what the SEC's done. The Big Ten hadn't really done that much, and yet they're making way more money than the SEC. Now the SEC's number 2, but they're a real distant number 2 in media revenue. And so you wonder why. Well, it's real easy. Why did they go get Rutgers? Oh, we got the New York City. No, you don't. You don't have New York City market. What you've got is one of the largest alumni bases in the entire world.
Yeah.
So while we hate Rutgers and wouldn't watch Rutgers unless, somebody told me, hey, Greg, it's late in the 4th quarter, flip it over. Ohio State's getting upset by Rutgers. I'm watching Rutgers right then. But the rest of the time, no. And the rest of the country, no. But when you have like 1 million active alumni, they probably are watching Rutgers just like we're watching Oklahoma State. If Oklahoma State's 0-10 and they're getting ready to play Kansas State or whatever, I'm going to watch it.
Yeah.
But the rest of the world's not. And so we got to understand why the Big Ten and why UCLA. Go get, if you want the market of LA, USC's great. Well, you go get UCLA too. I had no idea. Well, I looked up when they first grabbed UCLA a year ago. Their alumni base is incredible because they're a state school. as opposed to USC, which is a private school. Now, USC, obviously, a ton more tradition in athletics, but UCLA's got basketball, which the Big Ten thinks themselves as a good basketball conference. They're not as good as the Big 12, obviously, which is why I kind of like Arizona, but in the Big 12. But the thing is, you gotta look at those alumni bases, and the Big 12 and the SEC have a lot of small markets. The ACC has some too.
Yeah.
You look at ACC. You know what the size of Clemson, South Carolina is? It makes Stillwater look like New York City.
Really?
It's like, I can't even remember what it is, like 8,000 or some ridiculous number like that. It's one of probably the smallest major D1, P5 college in the country.
Yeah.
And yet, why do we watch them? Because they win. Well, the SEC we watch because they're good. The Big Ten gets watched, maybe not by us, unless it's Ohio State, Michigan, or maybe Penn State. We don't care about the rest of them, but they have these ginormous alumni bases. Yeah. And so everybody's going to watch Purdue. I love Purdue because I grew up there. I wouldn't watch Purdue unless nothing else was on. But you know who will watch it? Purdue alumni. And there's a million of them. And there's a million Minnesota and Ohio State and even Rutgers and Maryland alums that will watch their school. And that's why the Big Ten Network just absolutely took off. Now, we don't watch it much, but they do, and they have these huge alumni bases.
So do you think that's a huge reason that we went and snagged UCF?
Yeah, I do, because the thing on UCF, and I've said, I think they're a sleeping giant, for one. We saw what they did a couple years ago, right?
Yeah.
Now, that was in a weaker conference, but they were really, really good. They had an argument for a national championship. They didn't get in the playoffs or whatever, and that's unfortunate. But what they do have is this huge Orlando alumni base, and it's mostly for the early years. It's been because none of us heard of UCF about 20 years ago, right?
Yeah. No, probably they didn't win a game.
Yeah, I mean, we just didn't. I mean, it's one of those directional. You know, if they have a central in their name, it means they're not north or south, right? So, UCF a couple years ago, nobody heard of them. Then they come out of nowhere and they start tearing up. You probably don't remember this. South Florida was actually number 2 late in the season when they were in the Big East, and they haven't done much since. But when you're in Florida, man, you're going to get recruits. And now they're in the Big 12. They're going to get better recruits. Guy who's won a national championship, coaching them. I think that they are a sleeping giant, and they have a huge alumni base. Now, most of it's commuter from back in the day, but they're on campus. Houston's on campus. Cincinnati's on campus. BYU has the largest, and it's not even close. As far as the world watching them, you know, have you ever got into your Twitter account and got that little map thing and it shows you where all your followers are from on a map? Do that. It's like type in Twitter map. There's like an app for that, right?
Okay, yeah.
It's kind of cool. When you go look at BYU, who watches them on a Saturday, it's not a bunch of dots in Utah, although you'll get that too. But then you go to the rest of the country or the rest of the world, Africa, Europe, South America, where, you know, because they have that LDS deal where they, you know, the missionaries go out and they talk. So you run into an African guy. He doesn't know anything about college football. He doesn't know Alabama. He doesn't know Ohio State. You know who he does know? He knows BYU.
Yeah.
And every church in each one of those little communities, you know what they do? They go to the church and they watch BYU football live on a satellite. And they have since the early 80s. I always tell this story. I dated a girl at OSU who was from Utah. She'd gone to BYU. She was in grad school. We were dating for a while, and I went to her church a couple times. But what I really enjoyed was Saturdays, because back then, very few of us had satellites, right? Early 80s. They had it, and they would all go to church and watch. They'd get more people there than they would at church on Sunday and watching BYU. And everybody in the world's watching BYU. We had to get rid of OU and Texas to get them. To me, it's absolutely worth it, because you know what? In Africa and Europe, they're not going to be watching Texas and OU on a Saturday. they'll be watching BYU.
Yeah, and that's Matt, and that's a phenomenal point, and yeah, that makes a lot more sense because I look at a lot of my family played college football and pro football. I'm not that athletic. That's the reason I'm talking on a podcast. And none of them went to Oklahoma State, but I fell in love with it ultimately. But as someone who grew up in Texas, and a lot of my family played college football, like I see why Texas wants to do it, and I think that there's a lot of parts on why the Big 12 lost, Nebraska, Texas A&M, Texas AU, whatever it is. But like I see why Texas would want to go because I want to watch Texas and Texas A&M play. I think everyone is. I think that game's going to.
Oh, we all do. I definitely want to see that.
Yeah, well, it's funny. My girlfriend actually works for. So she went to FSU, right?
Okay.
And now she works for Texas A&M, right? And so she's never been to Texas before, and they flew her out like a high school recruit. Like took her to a baseball game, everything, probably about 2-3 months ago. And it's I went down to College Station for my first time probably about a month ago. It was crazy. I think their fans are very passionate, but whenever they left, it took a lot of that fan base because they have a massive fan base and a very loyal fan base, and they took it to the SEC. So it was a no-brainer to me that they were doing that. Now Texas leaving makes sense because you want to watch Texas A&M, and Texas is the biggest brand in football.
Oh yeah.
And they're gonna play OU till no one's alive. Like and that's a part of it. Now, what kind of shocked me with them going was, back in 2011, I'm sure you remember when the Pac-12, Texas, OU, Texas Tech, and Oklahoma State were going to join the Pac-12. It kind of shocked me whenever OU and Texas, sure, that Texas needs to be in the SEC. We want to watch Texas Alabama. We want to watch Texas A&M. We want that. But the fact that OU wouldn't, never mention Bedlam, kind of whatever, who cares? We're going to go follow Texas and the money, and that's our only priority in life. And I just kind of find it weird that Oklahoma State didn't, act on that or per se. I mean, I guess, Gundy's words of that's done. There's nothing we do about it. It's their decision, not ours. And I understand not wanting to play them, but the fact that Oklahoma State didn't get that offer as well. Does that make sense? I know that's kind of
yeah. I think that offer will come, and to be honest with you, I don't talk a lot about Oklahoma State going somewhere else because, man, I'm just happy to have this conference still together. I had 4 new teams that want to be there, that are thrilled to be there, and are pretty dang good. So I have no problem with that. Here's where the P5 or the P12, Pac-12 has trouble. They're thinking, oh, you know what, we'll go do the same thing the Big 12 did last year. The problem is they're landlocked west of the Rockies.
They are.
So you give me a G5 out there besides San Diego State, which UNLV, Colorado State, Boise State, no way. And here's the other problem. Their snobbishness, their academic snobbery. There's no way in God's green earth they're ever going to take Boise State because Boise State's about 10 years removed from being a junior college, really.
Yeah.
And their academics if they're making fun of the Big 12 for academics or the SEC for academics, Boise State, and we've talked about this on Boise State shows, they know it. That's what's killing them is academics. So they're probably a good 10, 15 years away from, maybe getting in the Pac-12. But the problem is the Big 12 had 4 great G5s, and if you want to call BYU a G5 because they were independent, but the other ones were. And thrilled to have them, and I don't think they're G5s. I don't think, in reality, a G5 to me is a level lower. None of the 4 schools we're bringing in are a level. About Houston, when you're younger, you probably don't remember. Houston's been really good at times.
Yeah, well, my stepdad won the Southwestern Conference in '90.
Yeah, well, here's the deal. You probably don't remember. How old were you?
I was born in '97. So,
okay, so you're a young fellow. You don't remember when Baylor got in this conference?
Mm-mm.
They were 0-16 in basketball. They were 0-9 in football for several years in a row. I mean, they didn't win a game. They were absolutely horrible. And they weren't just – they made what Kansas was like a couple years ago. They made Kansas look terrific. Now we see what they're doing in football, basketball, women's basketball. They've been good in baseball. they would not have been near this good had they not been in the Big 12. TCU was already pretty good. Remember, they won a Rose Bowl against Wisconsin. But once they got in this conference, look what they've done. It's like, they got a lot more money to do stuff with now. And they're in a metropolitan area, so they're getting more TV eyes. And kids go, you know what? TCU was just in a national championship. Alabama, because kids getting recruited, they don't remember 5 years ago. They remember recently.
Exactly.
It's like, you know what? Alabama didn't even make the playoffs. If I'm TCU, I'm going, you know what, guys? We were just in a national championship game. Now, I'm not going to bring up the score, but we were in a national championship game. Where was Alabama? They weren't even in the Final Four.
Yeah.
So let's not get crazy. You can stay home. Mom and dad can go to every game you play because even your road games are going to be in Lubbock, Stillwater, wherever. The I-35 conference still holds true for most of it. And so with the old Big XII and then you bring Texas Tech in and Baylor. So a good chunk of them are right on I-35. And I think that's a great selling point for TCU. Then you add in NIL, and they're doing pretty good there. But you know who's really kicking butt in NIL right now? Texas Tech. Texas Tech. I don't know. Some oilies are getting some money out there to Tech because they are getting those guys.
If you're if I could be misquoting, but this is how I got told. I haven't vetted this at all, but if you're an athlete at Texas Tech on the football team, if you're a football player at Texas Tech, even if you're riding the pine, you're getting a minimum of $1,500 a month.
Yep.
And that was a huge point that they were making to me whenever Post the Purpose and I were in talks of me joining and becoming a board member and all these things. And essentially, because the university doesn't really want us to talk about it, but Post the Purpose, and I don't feel shy saying any of this, by the way, but like Post the Purpose, whenever back in, January maybe, they said that we raised $4.5 million, but the university doesn't want us to post it and all this stuff. And they were like, hey, I want you to post it. And I was like, I'm going to get fired. I'm the scapegoat. I'm the youngest dude here. This is what I meant to do. And I just posted it. So I posted and we raised $4.5 million, which is a lot of money, especially whenever I first came over and I said, hey, can y'all pay me? And they said, no. We just put $30,000 into this. And I was like, all right, well, whenever I want to go to games, just get me tickets. That's all I care about. And I want to help Oklahoma State. It's not about the money to me.
Right.
And that's a big reason I left the sports industry. I was working for NASCAR in Florida for the last year. And I literally left. I was like, I'd rather just work a 9 to 5 and have my Post the Purpose and OK State Probs and the podcast because I enjoy doing it. But yeah, with all the NIL stuff, I think we're at $6.5 million right now for Oklahoma State, which is insane because we're supposed to be the podunk school who doesn't, but we have loyal alumni, in my opinion, from what I've seen. We have loyal alumni who are willing to donate and kind of, make sure that the future is bright.
Well, in the late 70s, when I first moved here, we had loyal alumni then who were willing to give. It just wasn't legal back then. And we got on probation. And then again in the late 80s, I just like, Oklahoma sneezes and they give Oklahoma State probation. You know how that used to work.
Yeah, absolutely.
The NCAA never shoots the top dogs. They're going after everybody else. But hopefully the NCAA won't be around much longer.
Yeah, I think that with because everyone keeps talking about a 2-conference system. And by the way, it's not the Big Ten and SEC. It'll be Fox Sports versus ESPN. But I think that they'll just get big enough and have enough money where they'll just tell the NCAA, hey, we don't need you. And I personally speaking, on the same topic, is like I think that there should be a commissioner for all of it. I
Agreed.
Agreed. Because otherwise, you're getting. We've watched it for years, up until I guess they just announced 2024 SEC schedule. Is like, what's the Georgia schedule this year? What they play like UAB and like what they're playing too. And so like obviously,
well, they're only playing 8 conference games. I mean, that's ridiculous.
And they're like, well, our teams are tougher, and it's like, well, okay, well, Texas A&M lost to App State at home. So I mean, how tough are we getting here? And I think that if you're the commissioner of the SEC, you're gonna make sure your flagship school in Georgia or Alabama is what
Sure.
they get, and that makes sense to me. And I love that Texas A&M, by the way. You look at their 2024 schedule. What they got? Texas. They got Notre Dame going there. They have a hell of a schedule. And I not that they have a whole lot of say in it, but I think that's awesome that they're kind of taking that route, if that makes sense.
Well, talking schedules, that's one reason I like Oklahoma State. With it, what was it, 6.5 wins was the over under,
Yeah,
and
ridiculous.
I'm dropping the house on that one because
Yeah.
first of all, they should win their first 3 games, right? So
Mm-hmm.
now you only got to win 4 more. That it's less than half of them, and I'm looking at just the home games alone, and a couple of. I mean, if they don't get 7 wins, I'll be shocked.
Yeah.
Just that. I mean, and once again, I'm a Gundy fan only because, I watched him play as a quarterback at Oklahoma State in the late '80s. Enjoyed him. I think he's always been, him and his wife are Oklahoma State people, always have been. When Mike finally decides to step down, he'll stay in Stillwater, Oklahoma. I mean, he loves his ranch, all that. And I think he got a bit of a wake-up call there on the NIL stuff and some of the other, the transfer portal. And that didn't work out too well. But to be honest with you, look around. It's not working out too well for anybody. Everybody who's good is leaving. Alabama, Texas, everywhere. I mean, Oklahoma, they're all losing players. Even in softball, their 2 best players just left Oklahoma. Yeah. So what's going on there? I mean, I think the NIL combined with the transfer portal is the absolute worst thing that has happened to college sports. And I hope I know they're going to tighten up the transfer portal and they're going to legislate the NIL a little bit. So hopefully we'll get this thing wrapped up. But I don't think either of them's been good for Oklahoma State.
Yeah. And Gundy, in my own opinion, because I watched the fall of Gary Patterson very closely and how he wouldn't adjust and the NIL and he just wasn't relating with the kids anymore. And, I started to kind of think that about Gundy a little bit because obviously this last season wasn't what we were expecting. A lot of reasons behind that. But from my information and working with Coach the Purpose and following it with a little bit more, curtains pulled is like, we went out and got Alan Bowman and we kept basically every out that we wanted to from last season between Kendall Daniels. There were rumors about Ollie Gordon going to Texas Tech, Colin Oliver, he stayed on. And I think that there's a time to clean house. And a lot of these 5th-year COVID guys that wanted to go, it's probably just their time to go. And
yeah, I can see that because you see a lot of guys who are happy after 4 or 5 years where they're at, but they're grads, so they can go anywhere and play a year. Mm-hmm. And then you look at guys that have done that and then gone off the NFL. There was a kid who was a defensive back for Kansas about 10 years ago, had the 5th-year transfer because he was a graduate, came to Oklahoma State, ended up starting for the Dallas Cowboys. Can't remember the name. You probably will. But there's just, sometimes, gosh, I've been here 4 or 5 years in COVID. A lot of these guys have been here 5 years. I don't blame them going somewhere else for a year. Now, if they're guaranteed to be starting next year and then they leave, like the kid that went to Missouri, I never understood that situation. Unless his girlfriend left him and transferred to Missouri, I just never understood that at all.
Yeah, and there's a lot of weird numbers out there, like 90. It's a number in the 90th percentile of Power 5 transfers don't wind up at a Power 5 school, and you see these glorified examples.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Caleb Williams, all those type of guys. Yeah, sure, you can use them as the flagship, but majority of it, I watched it. I watched a lot of guys leave Oklahoma State, and now they're playing places like I'll never watch. Shane Illingworth is a great example. I loved Shane Illingworth. I had him on my podcast. Right?
Yeah, I did too.
But what? He goes to Nevada and you never hear from him again?
Well, I think. What do you think is going to happen to Spencer Sanders? I mean, they've got 3 former starters, all at big time Power 5s that are all competing. Who's going to get it? Now, I guess he had a pretty good spring game, but I keep hearing academic issues, like he may not even be eligible. So I don't know what's going to happen there. It'll be very interesting. I'll watch Ole Miss more than I ever have. Just I want to see what's going on with the Spencer Sanders saga.
The spring game, you should go watch his highlights from the spring game. They actually threw him the ball. Like he ran a reverse and then went out
Right.
and caught a wheel pass, which is ridiculous. But what I can say, and I actually just logged on to the O State Illustrated message boards. Never been on him. Seen screenshots, never been on him. Logged on for the first time. Well, I saw my name pass by, and someone called me like if Spencer Sanders asked me on a date, I would take it because how much I defend Spencer Sanders. But I was very, very close to Spencer Sanders, like very, very close. Like the things that he did, like in a short way, I can say it is like my younger brother got into a really bad car accident and shattered his ankle. Right, he's on crutches.
There you go. Yeah, I saw you post that actually.
Yeah, but well, and like I get it. You know, I can drink a little bit of the orange Kool-Aid. At this point, Spencer Sanders is one of my friends. Obviously, working with Coach the Purpose, you know, that and running OK State Pros, everything. I saw all the, well, Spencer was recruiting people out. Well, Spencer said this to Coach Gundy. And I finally just had it because I didn't talk to Spencer while he was in the portal, but whenever he landed, I texted him congrats. And I was drinking one night on my patio in Florida. And I saw Spencer posted on Snapchat. It was probably like 10 or 11 at night. He posted on Snapchat like something like irrelevant. And so I FaceTimed him. And we sat there and I drank whiskey and talked to him for about an hour. And he's very comfortable in his decision. He loves Lane Kiffin. And I don't think
I get that. You know what I didn't like though, and you didn't either, I'm sure, since you're his friend. I didn't like the way he left things. There was a lot, and I told me, he kind of tried to talk me into leaving too. So I knew that was happening. But you know what? Maybe if Mike would have treated me the same way Spencer felt like he was treated, you know, if I'm in Spencer Sanders' shoes, I might have done the same thing. So I get that. The other thing I've learned, and this is something, when you're in college, you're friends with the guys playing. Leslie O'Neal roomed with me for a while. We were in class together. So, you know, we knew each other really well. And I couldn't have said anything about back then. I was friends with the wrestlers, the basketball players, the football players, and I couldn't have said anything bad about them. Just like I think I'm pretty honest with Mike Gundy, but I also know I have a bit of a blind spot, just like I would have had with Eddie Sutton. Now that Eddie Sutton's gone, and I don't really talk to Mike much anymore because we used to talk with him a lot when our kids played ball against each other. Okay. But, you know, I don't really see him anymore, so it's easier to be objective. I could not have been objective about Sean Sutton when he first got the job because we were friends. My oldest son's named after Sean Sutton. Yeah. So, but, you know, we had a falling out because I have to call it the way I see it, and he wasn't doing very well, right? Yeah. He didn't like that. He said, yeah, you have a job. And he even told me that before he was coach. I said, look, you know, one of these days you're going to be the head coach here, hopefully. And if you do bad, I'm going to have to call you out. And he goes, well, that's your job, man. I get that. But guess what? When it actually happened, you didn't get it so much. So we haven't spoken in a number of years. I'm not saying it's a adversarial relationship, but we're not buddies. We used to talk at 2:00 pretty much every morning because he knew I was awake and he was the only one awake then going over film. Yeah. I have learned I don't want to know any of the players. I don't want to, you know, I used to do the same thing in basketball when I was scout them. I would go meet them. I would know their parents. So when it came time to call them out, I couldn't be objective. And I look back now and I know I really couldn't be objective. And so just advice, if you're going to do this for a living, you know, now you're young and you know these guys and you go to class with them, party with them. But when you get past that point, you're doing this seriously, it's best not to know them because good or bad, you're going to have to. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, I loved, you know, hanging out with the quarterback and going to, you know, Willie's and whatever it was. And I did find that really hard because I mean, one of your buddies just threw 4 interceptions in the Big XII championship game. I mean, like, and no one, by the way, everyone defending him, everyone only sees the 4. They don't see that we ran it 3 times after that, punted it, and Spencer's frustrated with the play calling and all that. They see the 4 interceptions, and that's all you're gonna remember. Which I get it. 4 interceptions bad. I'm not defending that part. I'm just saying like I totally hear you on the point that like being friends with a lot of these guys, you know, I loved it and I wouldn't trade it for anything. But like in those type of moments, I was like, damn, anyone else, I probably, you know, would have been on them a little bit harder.
Yeah, and you know, your wife or girlfriend or whatever, you're not going to call them out on this show, and you're not going to call out your friends on the show either. Now, you're doing an Oklahoma State podcast, so you got to talk about players and coaches. That's your job. It's been a lot easier for me doing less Oklahoma State and more national stuff, and only talking about Oklahoma State as it references in the national and regional scene, conference-wise, all that stuff. And, you know, coaches take my recruiting service in basketball, but everybody takes my recruiting service either. Most of them, you know, have pretty thick skin, going, hey, you know what, Greg? I didn't like what you wrote, but you weren't wrong. So most of them are pretty objective. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I know Gundy definitely, especially it was the last game of the season this year, and there was a kid, he's Cody Nagel. He was someone he called. He just asked if there were going to be any coaching changes following.
Yes, I remember that.
And he ripped him apart, and I was like, man, there has to be an understanding on both sides, and I personally would never say something that would be disrespectful to my friends, even if I am doing my job. But the way they might take it and the way they might react might be completely separate. There's nothing I can control in that situation, you know?
When Bob Knight got the job at Tech, and I grew up a Purdue fan, right? So I hate it because he was an Indiana guy, right?
Yeah.
So he gets the job. That night I get a call from Pat Knight, his son, who's an assistant at Akron. And Pat goes, hey, Greg, my dad wants to take your service, so send me an invoice. I'm going to go with him. And he wanted to know, is there anything he can do for you? Because we're going to need a lot of help recruiting Texas. And I said, you know, I'd love to get him on my show Wednesday night. Can we do that? And it was a local Stillwater show. And we had him on. And the next day, of course, I was nervous as heck because I was a young guy and had never interviewed Bob Knight. But I had seen a lot of other interviews and I didn't want to go south for me. So I was very careful about what I asked him. First thing they had, hey, you getting all moved into Lubbock? Everything go good? He said, yeah. He goes, I went hunting the other day and I'm going to have to change a choke in my shotgun because the birds out here are bigger and tougher. And so the next day I go to OSU basketball practice, and Coach Sutton was kind enough to let me bring my boys in who a little bit older than you. So it's been a long time. And he comes up to me. He goes, hey, I heard you had Bob on the show. How did I said, you know, he was really charming. And he looks at me and goes, he can be. It's like, so if you ever get a chance, there's a called, I think it followed Season on the Brink, which is a great Bob Knight book, but there was later like a Season Within or something written by the same guy. It was like the 88 season. And it was talking about Bob Knight, who was at Indiana, and Eddie Sutton, who was Kentucky. And Eddie wins, but he had his own refs, and Bob didn't like it. So Eddie's coming out of the presser, and Bob's going in. They just about threw down. So, yeah. But when Bob Knight was here, or when he was at Tech, and he would come to Stillwater, he was great. Except one time, I asked him a question. I don't even remember what it was. But I remember he goes, "Thanks, Greg." And then he looks around. He goes, "Any intelligent questions tonight?"
Oh my God.
So he had a way of just, you know, trying to get out of your skin a little bit. He even came up and apologized in Dallas the next year. He goes, "Man," he goes, he goes, because it was funny. He comes up. His opening statement was, "Hey, you know what? We came to play basketball. Oklahoma State came to kick our ass." It's like, so he was a lot of fun, and of course he has Alzheimer's now, and that's just so tough to see. it was tough to see with Coach Sutton losing his faculties. And I remember when Kelvin Sampson came and from Houston, this is about 5-6 years ago, came up to him after the game and because Coach Sutton, you remember me, and he had no idea who he was. And Kelvin was in the press conference afterwards and broke down. I mean, it was tough to watch, really tough to watch it. Kelvin's always been great to me, even when he's in Oklahoma. So I'm looking forward to having him in the conference because he took my recruiting service when he was at with Judd Heathcote as an assistant at Michigan State, and then later on as a head coach at Wazoo. And he comes in. He had hired me to come speak at his camp on recruiting and what kids should do to maximize their recruiting, stuff. So afterwards, I'm sitting down next to him. He goes, "Hey, I need to go over the other facility here in a little bit to watch my son play." Kellen, who, by the way, this tells you how old I am. Kellen will be the next head coach at Houston when Coach Sampson retires. But Kelvin said, I didn't even think of this, Greg, when I was at Washington State. He goes, "But now that I'm in Oklahoma, should I be worried you're an Oklahoma State alum?" And I said, "Coach, when it comes to my recruiting service, I'm loyal to one color and one color only, and it's green." He put his arm around me. He goes, "Buddy, we're on the same side." So I've always liked Kelvin and really looking forward to getting him in the conference again.
Well, yeah, it is funny too, like with my friends that have transferred to different schools and my relationships with them following, because I always tell them, like, as long as you don't go to Oklahoma, like I'm supporting you. And whatever you
I felt the same way about the kid that just went to OU, or football player. Yeah, Trey. Yeah, I can't, I get it. You go to Mississippi and, with Spencer, whatever. Do not go to that university 76 miles south of here.
Well, and so I posted a couple times about Trace Ford, and he's responded and things like that. And I knew him pretty well. I mean, like, we weren't the best of friends, but I was hanging around the athletes and whatnot. And I posted it was Ricky Fowler. He found a snake on the course and he picked it up with his club. This was like a month ago. And I quote tweeted it and said, I didn't know at Trace Ford played golf. And he was like, that Mamba mentality. And we kind of went back and forth, but he DM'd me because he was upset. And I was like, hey, I love you, Trace. I really do. And I hope you do great. But ultimately, I'm against them. And I like, if there's anyone I'm against, it's them. And so and he's like, well, I get it. I love this account before I decided to go to OU. And I'm like, well, you're about to hate it, just like every other OU account.
Well, before the transfer portal came about, it used to be when you transferred from the Big 12, you could not go to another Big 12 school.
Yeah.
And if a coach wanted to pick a school he didn't want you to go to, like, let's say a kid transfers to Ole Miss, but Ole Miss is going to be the first game of the season, he would have put Ole Miss, you can't go to Ole Miss. And that stuck. Yeah, obviously, it's a free world now. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I could talk for hours about it, and we've been going for about an hour. But yeah. I really do appreciate you coming on and everything. I know we said like a half hour, but I'm super excited that you're back on. If you want to shout out your socials or whatever it is, and if anyone's listening and you don't follow Greg Swaim, you're really missing out. I mean, he puts out the best intel, and he's always going to keep you updated. So definitely give him a follow.
Absolutely. And look forward to getting you on the show too. When we get it started, I've been doing radio because I've got a face for radio. Heck, I've got a face for journalism writing, but I'm not a journalist. So there you go.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. Yeah, I like talking to drywall and a computer screen.
There you go. And look forward to getting you on here in August. We'll talk a little bit about the Pokes, and we'll talk about real football instead of conference
realignment. Yeah, no, I'm down. I'm excited. Well, I appreciate it.
All right, my man. You have a good one, and we'll look forward to. Hey, when you post this, make sure you tweet it and tag me, and I'll make sure to retweet it out to 70,000 plus.
Absolutely.
All right.